Welcome to Food Friends, a podcast inspiring home cooks to try new dishes in the kitchen by sharing trusted recipes, tips, and friendship. Hi, I'm Sonya.
And I'm Carrie. We met in Los Angeles over 15 years ago as personal chefs and haven't stopped talking about food since. We're so glad you're here. Hi, Sonya.
Hi, Carrie.
Sonya, I've been thinking that we don't do enough bean episodes. I'm really wanting to talk more about beans in 2025.
Yeah, especially for how much we love beans, which is why it was so fun to have Sarah talk to us about chickpeas, arguably one of our absolute favorite legumes.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Well, what's great about a chickpea is that it tastes just as good coming from a can or a vacuum pack than it is if you cook it like homemade from dry. It's really incredibly forgiving and crispy, and it, absorbs a lot of great flavors. So it's really, I don't know if I'm willing to say it's my favorite, but it really might be my favorite.
Your favorite bean?
Yeah, my favorite bean.
What I love about this conversation is Sarah really shows us how versatile chickpeas are in the kitchen. She's talking about sheet pan meals, different kinds of ways to make dinner in 15 minutes or less. You won't believe this viral recipe that she created. She also has ways that she uses chickpeas in desserts that kind of blew my mind. Sarah's just really inspiring. She's a food scientist, a nutritionist, and she has been creating recipe content on liveeatlearn.com, her website, for over a decade, sharing vegetarian and plant-forward recipes. It is so fun to get her perspective on this.
Well, I'm excited for our listeners to hear this conversation.
Stay tuned to hear all about chickpeas with Sarah Bond. Hi, Carrie. Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Hi.
Sarah, we're so happy to have you on the show. You are a nutritionist and a food scientist and the creator of liveeatlearn.com, which is an amazing resource of vegetarian recipes. It's a blog. There's also your Instagram feed. You are providing so many amazing dishes and ideas for people who want to incorporate more vegetables, more plant-based, and more vegetarian meals into their life. So we'd love to hear how you got started as a recipe developer and content creator.
Yeah. So my journey started about 10 years ago. I had just graduated from college. I studied human nutrition. And when I graduated, I realized that I knew everything about healthy food and what it meant to eat healthy, but I actually had no idea how to cook food that was tasty. um, and so I started the site sort of as like a traditional blog, like a diary style blog, where I was documenting my process of learning how to cook healthy food that tasted good. That was 10 years ago. And I have since learned how to cook food. And about, I guess, 7 years ago now, I went on to do my master's in a type of food science called sensory science, which is all about how you can manipulate different aspects of food to do different things to your senses. And so a lot of my friends who I studied with now work in the food industry, in their food science departments. But I used everything I learned to sort of create recipes that people want to eat, specifically vegetarian recipes. Now I'm here and I run the site full time, and I just create vegetarian recipes for people to help them eat more plants.
Sarah, I just want to jump right into your Chickpea Fridays. Sonia and I are huge fans of beans. We both really love chickpeas. We always have them in our pantry. I'm curious, why did you choose chickpeas as your bean of choice that you develop recipes for and release every Friday?
Yeah. So when I started the site, I actually was doing like featured ingredient weeks. So every week and that was sort of my way of learning how to cook. I would go to the grocery store and pick a random ingredient, and then I would figure out how to turn that into a few different recipes. And so for the past 10 years, that's been my style. And slowly I've realized that I've pretty much covered the bases of every ingredient. So now I'm just kind of changing my strategy of how I go about cooking. And one ingredient that my audience has really loved and that I really love cooking is chickpeas. And so that Chickpea Friday is just sort of a tribute to the old way of how I developed recipes while also finding new ways to use that can of chickpeas that everyone has in their pantry. So, yeah.
Yes, certainly you just to be clear to our audience, you do more than just chickpea recipes, but it's actually really fun to explore one ingredient that thoroughly and that dynamically. Like I really look forward to those coming out in addition to all your other recipes that come out. And I think we all do have chickpeas in our pantry. Most people do. Me and Carrie certainly do. And we love dried beans too, but chickpeas are one of the things I always keep cans of on hand in the bean family. I'm wondering if you have any hard takes on brands or sourcing your chickpeas or things you love, or if you just feel like they're all really good and you can't go wrong.
Yeah, that's one of those ingredients that I don't have strong opinions on the brand. I usually just reach for the store-bought brand. And then I also do love dried beans, but just having a can of chickpeas at dinner time takes away so much of the stress because I don't have to think 12 hours prior what I'm going to make for dinner. It's just the can is there. I always have at least five of them because every time I go to the grocery store, I feel like I buy a can just in case I'm not having some at home. So yeah, no real preference on brand, but um, yeah, definitely canned.
What would you say is your quickest chickpea recipe? Like the easiest, quickest chickpea recipe you have?
Okay, I'm thinking in terms of dinner. The quickest one is the one that went the most viral. I published this last year, and it's my Marry Me Chickpeas. And so this recipe is done in like 15 minutes, and it packs in so much flavor in so little time. Um, so you basically make a base of some butter, garlic, and some spices. I like to do like smoked paprika, sun-dried tomatoes, salt and pepper. And you just get all that going, get all the spices sort of blooming in the butter. And then you add in your chickpeas and some vegetable broth and just let that simmer for like 5 minutes just to heat up the chickpeas. And then you stir in some cream, Parmesan, and basil, and that's it. The whole thing's ready in like 15 minutes. And I serve it with everything. So I'll serve it with like rice or pasta or veggies. But yeah, that one has gone insanely viral. I think just because people want easy and they want flavor. And yeah, that's one of my favorites right now.
Yeah, the richness of the cream, and then you get that easy, light protein from the chickpeas with all those kind of herbaceous and sweet and savory flavors. The Marry Me Chicken recipe that I understand that you're playing on that idea, we've talked
Mhm.
about, I think, in our chicken episode. And we've also heard other, recipe developers play around with that idea. I think Justine Duran had her like engagement salmon or something like instead of marry me chicken, and I could be wrong about which specific protein, but I love that this is like a fully, vegetarian option for people. And it's so fast and so yummy. And like the visuals, which we'll link to in our show notes, and you just want to eat this. I'm, it's kind of like, a natural progression for chickpeas to put them in something saucy and serve them over a starch or veggies. I'm wondering if you have like a very surprising use of chickpeas in your arsenal.
Um, so I have a few. I've done like dessert chickpeas before, so I can definitely speak to that. But one that I recently came up with that I really like is chickpea eggs. And so it's
Oh,
kind of like it's playing on like eggs in a hole, where you're like cooking eggs in a hole of bread, but with chickpeas. So you're taking chickpeas and you're cooking them in a on a pan, just with some oil or butter and some spices, just until they get a little bit crispy. And then you sort of put them into circles and form a little hole inside of it, and then just crack the egg into it. And the egg whites sort of spread over the chickpeas and hold the whole thing together. And it's just such an easy way of bringing chickpeas into morning because I feel like I use them for dinner all the time, but they deserve to be enjoyed all day, I think. So that one's been
Um,
a fun little protein breakfast.
I saw that recipe and I want to just highlight a really brilliant tip that you offered people, which is when after the chickpeas have been crisp and you sort of move them around and create a hole for the eggs, you say to put it's like some oil, like the oil from the sun-dried tomatoes. Is that what it is? And it like adds
Yeah,
more flavor to the dish.
yeah, especially if you're not working with nonstick. Like it's just you already have the oil out. I love to minimize ingredients, so if you already have the jar out, just using that instead just
Like
infuses so much more flavor. And I feel like that oil is never getting used anyways. So
like you
yeah.
put the oil into the center before you crack the egg into it?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so smart.
It's so
Yeah.
smart, and I hate to waste food, and so I love that suggestion because, like, to your point, you already have that jar out, so you're just like, you're just sort of scooping a little bit of that oil in, and it adds so
Yeah.
much more flavor. And
Yeah.
I would eat those chickpeas for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. I think that's like such a it's a brilliant recipe.
Yeah.
I'm curious, is there one chickpea recipe that you go to like time and time again? Like, do you have a favorite? Did you pick a favorite child?
That's a hard one. I think I would go back to it's like the first recipe that went viral back in like 2015 when things could go viral on Pinterest. And that was my roasted chickpea gyros. So I created that one because at that time I didn't know how to cook still. And the only recipe I knew by heart was tzatziki. And so I was looking for a recipe that I could put my tzatziki on. And so I just roasted up some chickpeas. And for that one, like I use whatever spices I'm feeling that day. So I think I use a lot of like heat with that one. So I'll do like cayenne and a lot of black pepper, some smoked paprika, and I'll roast that till crispy. And then the tzatziki sort of holds the chickpeas onto the pita, and then you do your usual toppings like lettuce and red onion and tomato. And so that one is nice because it's fun. You can have bowls sort of all over the table, so everyone can make their own. And yeah, that's just like a fun, easy dinner that feels sort of special while being super easy.
Yeah, you're touching on two things that Carrie and I talk about a lot and that are really important to us as home cooks. One, to have like easy go to recipes, but that are modifiable for whoever's at your table. So even if that's just your family, like Carrie has a child and a husband, and they have different preferences, and she and James might like things spicier than Mac would like. And my husband is notoriously very particular. And so but then there's also this element of the fun of having people customize a meal. Like I just love the idea of having the center of your meal be these simple spiced crispy chickpeas, but then you can have this whole world of toppings and flatbread and sauces. You could do tzatziki. I imagine hummus or tahini would be delicious here as well, or baba ganoush. Like you could really make it sort of a Mediterranean or Middle Eastern feast, couldn't you?
Yeah. And that's how I'm seeing a lot of people when they tag me on social. That's how they're serving this one. And it just feels so much more special because yeah, it's an experience versus just being served something on a plate. I think people really like to have that interactive feel to dinner, especially when you're serving guests. So, yeah, that's
And it's and
a fun
especially if
one.
it's vegetarian and maybe they're not used to having a vegetarian meal, it's such a great gateway because it's almost like you don't even notice anything's missing because there's so much abundance on the table. Uh,
Yeah.
to switch gears back to like sort of also, the kinds of recipes Carrie and I are always on the hunt for. We're big fans, especially me. It's no secret. I love a sheet pan meal. And I love to throw chickpeas onto sheet pans. Like I think it's just such an easy thing to roast. And it can either get crispy or it can just be another like roasted element among other vegetables. I'm
Mhm.
wondering if you have any sheet pan dinner recipes that, your audience and you just keep coming back to.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I have quite a few because I feel like a lot of times if I've sort of created a recipe and I think like if it needs anything, like a protein or something more filling, like a can of chickpeas is always just the answer. And so I'd say most of my sheet pans, you'll find at least a can of chickpeas on there. And usually I'll do it where if it's like veggies and chickpeas, I'll sort of separate them so the chickpeas can have their breathing room and they can get really crispy while the veggies are letting off all that moisture and kind of steaming because you don't want them to keep the chickpeas from getting as crispy as they could be. Um, but yeah, I think that's a great way of just adding a pop of protein and fiber. Um, yeah, I'm thinking I do it. It's like grain bowls. I have a wintry grain bowl that I do. That's you just do big chunks of onion and sweet potato, and then there's chickpeas on the other side of the pan, and that all just kind of roast together. And then you top it with. I have a yum sauce. That I think the restaurant is in Portland, Cafe
It
Yum. Yeah.
is. I was gonna say, is it the
Um,
Portland yum sauce?
yeah,
It's this famous place in Portland, and people are obsessed with the sauce.
Yeah, well, it's rightfully so. It's so good. And so
Well,
that sauce also
yeah.
has chickpeas in it. And so it's like a double whammy of chickpeas because the sauce it blends silken tofu and nutritional yeast and chickpeas and almonds. Um, and then you drizzle that over, and it's just out of this world.
Well, I want to go back to a tip that you offered because that's something that we're always trying to, that Sonia and I are always sharing with each other, and that we want to always share with our listeners. And I think it's really smart if if you're doing like a sheet pan meal where you have vegetables and you have chickpeas, that you're giving the chickpeas their space, because I do think that you're really going for that crispiness, especially when you're roasting them on a sheet pan. And
Hmm.
if you're putting them next to, like broccoli or cauliflower, or really any vegetable, it's going to give off some water, and that's going to prevent the chickpeas from getting crispy.
Yeah.
Um, and I was wondering, like, you know, what recipe would you point someone towards if they're chickpea curious, or maybe even if they're a little chickpea resistant? Like, do you have recipes that you like really try to convert people over to chickpea love?
Oh, that's an interesting one because I feel like the Marry Me chickpeas have so much flavor, but I think for people who texture is kind of an issue, then that's not an ideal one because they're not getting crispy. They're cooking in that sauce. They still have a lot of that chickpea texture. So I would say one where the chickpeas get really crispy. So like my air fryer chickpeas, I think that could be a nice one. I have a seasoning option in there that kind of makes them taste like Doritos. It uses like nutritional yeast and like seasonings. And so I feel like something like that would be great for a chickpea curious person because they just kind of, they're almost like potato chips. They're so crispy and so flavorful that you forget that they're a bean.
Can you walk us through the exact spicing you use? I'm so curious.
Okay, yeah. So the Dorito flavor, it's nutritional yeast is sort of the base that adds a lot of that umami, savory, cheesy kind of flavor while keeping it totally vegan. And then I use garlic powder, some onion powder, cumin, paprika. I like to use smoked paprika. That's just my favorite spice, but you could also use sweet, a little bit of chili powder, and then salt. And so they're all in equal proportions. It's all a quarter teaspoon of all those spices and then two big tablespoons of the nutritional yeast. And so I just like to make a big batch of that, honestly, and then I'll sprinkle it on to a lot of things, like kale chips or anything I'm cooking, honestly. But it's really good on the chickpeas from the air fryer.
I'm curious if you ever do like a taco version of that, because I feel like that's like a way. I mean, I think it goes back to like sort of gyro chickpeas, or, like a pita chickpea. Like, I think putting something like that into a starch, or a taco shell, like that helps people access those flavors. And so if you're giving them like a crispy chickpea with a Dorito flavor, like my brain immediately goes to like a taco. Would you ever do it that way?
Yeah, and I've done chickpea tacos. I haven't done them with this seasoning blend, which now I'm feeling like I maybe should. I think my chickpea tacos, I forget the exact seasonings I used, but I mean, it's like, it's very similar, like a cumin, some spices. And with that one, I do like a cilantro sauce, like a creamy cilantro sauce that
Mm.
ties it all together. That one's also ready in 15 minutes, and it's one of my favorite recipes. I made it the cover of my cookbook because I just love it so much. um,
Yeah,
but
that
yeah, the
vibrant green of a cilantro sauce against the toasty caramelized brown of a spiced roasted chickpea, or is that an air fryer
mhm,
chickpea? Either way, it's such a
yeah,
beautiful combo of colors. And it's again, that's part of what draws people into a vegetarian dish if they're not already inclined to eat that way.
yeah, just having the different components that sort of balance each other. You want like the creamy and like the soft and the crunchy and the spice and yeah.
What
So any recipe where I can sort of combine all those different things is
Can
yeah.
can you walk us through your cilantro sauce? Because I feel like that would be great with any of the roasted chickpeas that if even if someone's just starting with like a basic roasted chickpea, to have a creamy sauce would make it taste so delicious.
Yeah, so it's definitely a sauce for cilantro lovers, which our house is cilantro lovers. It uses a cup of cilantro, and then you're going to blend that together with a half a cup of plain yogurt, a quarter cup of red wine vinegar, a quarter cup of extra virgin olive oil, 2 teaspoons of mustard, 2 cloves of garlic, and then a half teaspoon each of smoked paprika, cumin, and black pepper. and that just all blends together, and it's so vibrantly green, and it has so much cilantro flavor and like the zing from the vinegar. And yeah, it would go well on a lot of things, but tacos is my favorite.
It's so good. We love a good herb sauce. And, I was surprised or forgot that Ina Garten hates cilantro. I was reading her, like, we're listening to an interview and she was like, I hate cilantro. It's never in any recipes. And I was like, wow, she's right. It's never been in any of her recipes. So I would say to anyone who hates cilantro, I feel like that sauce could be, you could swap out parsley for the cilantro, or you could do a combination of mint and parsley
Yeah,
and it would be super
that
yummy.
would be
It
good.
just feels like a really versatile, or like whatever herbs you have, because really it's that yogurt and vinegar and mustard and all those other flavors that add to it. It's a great base.
Yeah, I'm also thinking like it's not the same cuisine by any means, but like a romesco sauce would be really
Yeah.
good on it with like the roasted pepper and the almonds and the smoky flavors. I think that could work really well with the crispy chickpeas.
Yeah, and the richness of the nuts, like it would just kind of it would bring a lot of umami to that dish too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to go back to desserts because you kind of dropped that you do make desserts with chickpeas. And I think this is always sort of surprising or baffling to some people. I know there was a lot of controversy when they started making like chocolate chickpea hummus and selling it at Trader Joe's. And people, had a lot of mixed reviews on that as a concept. But it's true that they can be incorporated into desserts in really interesting ways. Do you have a favorite, like tried and true chickpea dessert recipe?
Yeah. So I make chickpea blondies, sort of like in the same vein as how black bean brownies are delicious. I use chickpeas to make blondies basically. And so I've been making this recipe for years now, and I just sort of remade the recipe because I wanted new photos of it and to retest it. And I've fallen in love with it again because it's so good. Now all my friends are requesting it for their birthdays. It's like the thing in our friend group that everyone wants chickpea blondies on their birthday. Um,
Wow.
but yeah, that one's it's really easy, honestly. You just throw everything into a blender or a food processor. It's got chickpeas, which replace the flour, and then it uses almond butter instead of peanut butter, and that's just because I'm allergic. Um, and I also, I mean, I haven't tasted peanut butter, so I can't tell for sure, but I think it would make the flavor more neutral than a peanut butter blondie would, and so it really sort of highlights the chickpea flavor without being overwhelmingly chickpeas. I don't think if you didn't know what was in it, I don't think you could guess that it was chickpea based. Um,
So it's
and then there's some
gluten
egg and
free.
It's
seasonings.
also,
Yeah.
yeah, gluten-free.
There's no
Yep.
flour at all.
Yeah. Basically, the chickpeas are providing all the structure for the brownies or the blondies. Yeah.
And it's also a one bowl dessert, right? It must
hmm
be so easy to make.
Yeah, it's so easy. You put everything into the food processor and blend it, and then you mix in some white chocolate chips. Or recently, I've been doing half half, like white chocolate and then dark or semi dark or semi chocolate chunks, and then you just bake it, and it's so good.
Sarah, we've talked about a lot of these really easy chickpea recipes, which I think any home cook, whether you're starting or whether you're, more advanced, like can really access. But I noticed a couple of these, like I would call them a little bit more fussy recipes with your chickpeas. There's a chickpea cordon bleu, which really caught my eye. There's also chickpeas and dumplings, which I believe you said was one of your most popular recipes, and you found it surprising because it is fussy. And
Mhm.
so, I was watching these videos and I think like it really speaks to this idea that people are willing to invest more time for a recipe that's really tasty. And so I'm just wondering like where did these ideas come from?
Yeah, so those are both products of Chickpea Friday, and that's just so kind of what I do with Chickpea Friday is I think of what are those classic recipes that people who might have just given up meat or are trying to eat less meat, what are those recipes that they might be craving? And a lot of times they're chicken based, and usually when I see a chicken recipe, I just think I could use chickpeas instead. And so that was definitely the case with the cordon bleu and the chickpeas and dumplings. Um, the dumplings, yeah, that was one of my most popular recipes last year. And I think it's just because people want the comfort food that they grew up on and they crave it, but they don't know how to create that. And so Yeah, I mean, it's a little fuzzy because it's two major steps. It's creating that soup and then it's creating the dumplings. Once you do it, I think you realize that it's a lot easier than it seems. But yeah, I think it's interesting that people are, I think, starting to spend more time on these dinners for the sake of, getting the flavors that they miss.
Well,
Yeah, and
I think there's a place for the quick weeknight recipe, and then there's a place for something that's takes a little more effort, but yields really big rewards or makes you feel connected to your family or to comfort or to connection. Can you walk us a little bit through that chickpea dumpling recipe? Like, what
Yeah,
is, because it's curious to me because chicken soup is such a staple in so many omnivores' lives. And I think sometimes it's hard to find a replacement for that. And sounds like you're offering something that comes close or can actually replace it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So basically, like any soup, you're sort of building up the flavors. So you start off with a base of carrots and celery and onion and garlic, and you cook all of that until it's a bit soft. And then you stir in some flour and poultry seasoning. Poultry seasoning is totally vegan, it's just the seasoning that you might use for poultry. But doing that sort of does signal to your brain that it's a synonymous recipe. And so we use that, and then you'll stir in some broth, and that sort of thickens once it hits that flour. So you let that simmer all together, and then you make the dumpling dough, which is just a basic dough. It's flour and baking powder, salt. I put some poultry seasoning in that as well, just to infuse that with flavor. So every part of the recipe, no matter what you're eating, has that flavor. And then for that one, I actually use a vegan creamer uh, to sort of tenderize the dough. I use there's vegan coffee creamers, and I just use that. But if you're not totally vegan, you could also just use heavy cream or half and half. Um, and then, yeah, basically you just take like your ice cream scooper or a spoon and just take portions of the dough and plop it into the soup and put a lid on it. And then those steam in the soup. And the whole thing is ready in about 45 minutes. So, yeah, it's a really cozy Sunday type of dinner that actually doesn't take that long.
I mean, I would also offer that if you are making traditional chicken and dumplings, like it's impossible to have it ready in 45 minutes. Like that's a dish that really is like a weekend project, Sunday after. It's not like I come home at 5 o'clock and start making dinner unless you're really eat dinner late. So I think there's something so generous about that idea that you can also still make it in 45 minutes. And I would also add to this conversation about these classic dishes that you have this chickpea pot pie that you make. And that to me is also like, that's such a comforting space. And what I also really love about that recipe is how forgiving it is with the topping. I think you mentioned like you make the pie dough in like a lattice shape, but like be and you know what? My lovely friend Sonya would do the same thing. She would make it gorgeous and she would do like a perfect lettuce. I would just like slap, the pie crust over the top and like call it a day. But I also love that you say you can use like refrigerated biscuit dough if you don't have a pie crust. And
Mhm.
I think that's helpful for home cooks that are trying out these new ideas. Giving them some of these shortcuts is really helpful.
Yeah, because they're already taking the time to create this dish that might be out of their comfort zone and might take more time or effort than they're used to. So to provide those little shortcuts for people who aren't used to making like a whole pot pie, I think it sort of bridges the gap and makes it seem a little more attainable, which is kind of what I'm all about. And kind of the whole idea of Chickpea Friday in the first place is like, this is attainable and you can do it. And as you get going, you're going to feel more comfortable making some of these more complicated dishes.
Yeah, Sarah, because you have this food science and nutrition background, which is so admirable and fascinating on its own, can you speak to some of the nutritional benefits of chickpeas? There must be more than just that you like chickpeas. There seems like there's a reason you're especially highlighting this ingredient for people.
Yeah, so it is kind of like twofold. There's the versatility of it, which I love, just that it's such an easy way of getting like a healthy ingredient into your meal without having to like cook it and sanitize everything and, like a traditional meat dish would be. But it's also a nutrition powerhouse. um, they've got a lot of protein and fiber, which are the two big things for me. The protein is going to help you to feel satiated for longer. So after your meal, you're not going to be hungry in like an hour. And then the fiber is going to help you feel full right away. And that's sort of like your meal ending signal. So like that keeps you from going back for thirds or fourths because you actually have substance in your belly. So between those two things, and then they also have like a nice little host of vitamins and minerals. So yeah, it's just like an easy way to pack more nutrients in at dinner time.
Yeah, and I do agree with you that, we wanted to ask you the question of like, is there a brand that you like, or is there a way that you like to get your chickpeas? But I do think, in terms of all of the canned beans, the chickpea comes out the best, whether you like cook it yourself or pop it out of a can, or even one of those like vacuum packs that you can get. And like the texture is so good. And not only does it get crispy if you roast it, but also when you make these dishes like Marry Me Chicken, or even if you have like your favorite marinara, chickpeas really absorb all that flavor.
Yeah.
And so I imagine that you were thinking about that too as a food scientist. Like those sort of flavor bombs really call people, it's like it makes you crave more of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is like, I think, like what you were saying, that textural, it's got a really unique texture, I think, compared to a lot of beans. Like I've been loving butter beans lately, but they're so fragile that I don't think they could hold up in some of these dishes. Whereas chickpeas, they can hold up if you're cooking them for a long time. They can hold up in the air fryer. They can keep that texture, or they can get soft if you really want them to. But that definitely does make them unique and sort of helps you to use them in this wide variety of recipes that we're able to do.
Sarah, one thing that has gotten a lot of notice in recent years with chickpeas is aquafaba, which is the liquid from the cooking liquid of the chickpea, which can come from the can if you strain out that liquid and reserve it, or it can come from a pot if you're cooking chickpeas. And a lot of people use aquafaba in place of egg whites, like they'll use it for meringues or other kind of vegan uses. Can you share any ways that you use aquafaba?
Yeah, so basically the liquid that's in the can of chickpeas can be whipped similar to egg whites, and it creates a really light and fluffy vegan alternative to egg whites or meringue. And so one way that I like to use this is I'll mix that aquafaba with coconut milk and a bit of sugar and vanilla, and then I use that as popsicles in the summer, and they taste just like marshmallows.
Really?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What is it? I don't understand what it does to the texture, like as opposed to just freezing coconut milk. What does it add?
It makes it so light and fluffy because you're whipping the aquafaba until it's like stiff peaks. So I like to do some cream of tartar in there and then sugar at the same time to sort of stabilize the structure. And then I just slowly whisk in the coconut milk and then pour it into popsicle molds. And it's so good. I came out with a cookbook or a popsicle cookbook in 2019. And so I had to come up with like 75 popsicle recipes. And so I was like, let's just see what we can do with aquafaba. And that ended up being one of my favorite recipes in the book. Um, because yeah, it just tastes like light and fluffy marshmallows in popsicle form.
Does it have height? Like when you put the coconut milk into it, does it deflate it? It just makes it creamy, right? Or does it maintain its height?
It doesn't stay like it doesn't keep the stiff peaks and like the same height, but it the air is incorporated in there, and so it's still really light. Um, yeah, it's pretty cool. But you can also use it like almost any way that you would use egg whites. So you can do like spiced nuts with it. Like if you toss walnuts and
Oh,
then you sprinkle on some seasonings and just bake it for a bit, that's really nice too
that's
around
so
around
smart.
Christmas
Or like
time.
granola, like instead of using an egg white, if you add that,
Wow.
I am actually going to do that
I
like
that
this
that's
week.
genius. Yeah, I love that because 'cause
That's
you're
such
also
a great
adding all
tip.
that vegetarian protein to it as well.
I don't know how
Yeah.
much comes from the liquid, like
Okay.
how much would be in it, but I think the idea of not wasting that liquid and having it be this magical resource is just so cool.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
really love that. Well, Sarah, whenever we have a guest come on, we always ask them the same question, which is there any specific dish or any special way you like to celebrate your birthday?
Oh, okay. Hmm. I think my favorite meal is breakfast, and so I just go all out on breakfast on my birthday. Um, which I guess can mean a lot of different things. It's like whatever my hyperfixation meal of the week is. But if my birthday were to be this week, it would be an everything bagel with an egg and some vegan chorizo.
I love that.
I love that. I also saw that on you really like to make pancakes, and so I'm wondering if you would also choose like pancakes for your birthday.
Ooh, I might choose pancakes or cinnamon rolls, I think is also. I made these like chai espresso cinnamon rolls for Christmas this year, and I haven't stopped thinking about them. They're so good.
Yum. That sounds so
Amazing.
delicious. Well, you've given us a lot to think about with chickpeas. I'm excited to try so many of these dishes. Thank you so much for sharing all your legume wisdom with us.
It was a real
Yeah, thank you
pleasure to
so
have you.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks. And we'll link
Bye.
everything in the show notes. We'll have everyone be able to find your site, your book, and the recipes that we've mentioned in this episode. So definitely check those show notes out.
Awesome. Thank you.
Until
Bye.
next time.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for being our food friend.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode with friends. We love hearing from you, so follow us on Instagram or drop us a line at foodfriendspodcast.com.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you and your food friends. Happy cooking and eating.